Thank you, everyone, for attending this afternoon's webinar on business in the Basin. And as you've all known, as you've logged in, we are recording this, just like we've recorded the last webinars. So to start this off, I want to say thank you to all of our sponsors. These webinars are not possible without their support. And our sponsors are the Department of Energy, the North Dakota Industrial Commission, a couple of utilities, Basin Electric Power Cooperative, Minn Kota Power Cooperative, two coal companies, BNI Coal, North American Coal, and we're getting a lot of assistance and aid from Current Chemical through their division called Current Lighting. And we appreciate all their support for what we're doing here with this program. So we're going to have a presentation conducted today from two individuals, Jason Laumb, who's the Director of Advanced Energy Systems at EERC, and David Flynn, who's a Research Director at the Institute for Policy and Business Analytics of the Nistler College of Business and Public Administration. But first, I'm going to go through a couple of preliminary slides and talk just a minute about our webinar series. So last year we conducted, you can see in September and in November, we've been stepping through this story for the Williston Basin, where the first one talked in general about critical minerals. The second webinar talked about some of the technologies and how do we move forward with the materials that are present in the Williston Basin. And those were both recorded, just like today's is being recorded. And you can find those on the Williston Basin Core CM website, which is listed here. And we have the QR code for this, and we'll be showing this code at the end of the presentation as well. So don't scramble if you like to do that kind of thing and grab it immediately. Today, of course, we're doing the webinar for what you just saw on the title slide. And we had been talking in the past about an additional presentation, which for now, because of some new opportunities that have presented themselves recently, we're going to postpone this fourth webinar in the series. Originally, we were saying in the March timeframe. It'll probably be later in the summer to take advantage of some of these other opportunities and the data that we're going to be able to acquire through that and get all of that incorporated together, and then do the presentation on securing the Williston Basin's critical mineral future. Stay tuned for future announcements on that. So just real quickly again, when we talk about critical minerals is an umbrella term that kind of covers two general aspects, one being rare earth elements, or REEs. When we talk about those, we're talking about a very specific small list of the lanthanide series of elements from the periodic table. And a little later here, I'll be showing that periodic table. If we're just talking about rare earth elements, we'll say rare earth elements, even though they are critical minerals. And then if we're talking about critical minerals and not specifically calling out rare earth elements, we're talking about those other critical for production, but are not specific rare earth elements. And these would be things like lithium, magnesium, carbon. Those are a few examples of critical minerals, but they're not rare earth elements. So again, why are we interested in all this? Well, the bottom line is critical minerals and rare earth elements are critical in everything that we do in everyday life. And these pictures give some quick little examples of that. Also, why this is important is when we look at how we derive in the US our materials, our resources. So more than 80% of the critical minerals that are used in the US, we have to import. And if we look at a pie chart of just rare earth elements, you'll see that the vast majority of those come from Asia and one particular country in general. And so the year 2022 gave a really good example of how being linked into a world market and how that world market gets influenced from large world events, and it creates a lot of problems. And so we're trying to look for ways, of course, to become a little more domestically secure in what we do and not rely so much on imports. So when we get to the Williston Basin business region, And here we see that, here's an image of the Williston Basin itself. But of course, we believe that the business region goes far beyond just the basin. And this will be a large part of what Jason's going to be talking about this afternoon. But we say that the Williston Basin is in very good position to build the American supply chain. We have research expertise. We have extensive experience in mining and energy development. We have vast resources. We have one of the largest lignite coal deposits in the world. We have oil, we have gas, we have many other resources and industry. And our state governments in the Williston Basin all support development while protecting the environment. So we feel that we're in a very good position to help lead the way for domestic security. So now just real quickly to get to that periodic table, if you're not familiar, if we talk about rare earth elements, we're talking about those elements that you see here that are in blue. If we're talking about critical minerals, we're talking about those blue elements and all the other elements that are in the dark gray that are coming out from the image. Now in North Dakota and the Williston Basin itself, though,
I can barely hear this. I have it maxed out.
We're saying that we're focusing on those elements that are outlined in yellow. Those are the ones that we see the greatest potential to contribute to the market. In the first presentation that was conducted last year, we talked about where those resources would come from. And we had talked about that we could get rare earth elements from the lignite in existing coal mines, that rare earth elements could be extracted from derivative things like coal ashes. It could also come from other streams. For example, you're able to get lithium from produced waters. We talked about how we've also discovered that there are rare earth elements present in shales and in other sediments besides the coal deposits, and that there may be possibilities or seams that perhaps are a little too deep to do typical mining, that there might be ways to do in situ extraction of rare earth elements. And so then in the very last presentation, when we were talking about technologies, and that was led by Nolan Thaker. So he was talking about how do we move forward with evaluating these technologies? Well, he had talked about you have to keep the ore that's available and the reserves in mind. So the type of material, purities, grade, and are there co-production possibilities that are available while you're trying to do extraction for specific elements? Maybe there are other side streams and also be focused on. Technology scale is very important. And, are we there yet to something that is commercial and trusted? Are there processes here that we're looking at that are maybe a decade away, but could provide very strong impacts to what we're trying to do? And of course, the market needs, which is going to be the basis of today's presentation. And how do we produce the products that the market demands now? And how might we go about meeting the needs for the future? And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jason. Right before I do that, I want to remind everyone, if you do have questions throughout the course of this presentation, please put it in the chat and we'll be monitoring those. And at the end of the program here, we'll address these things. With that, Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks a lot, John. I appreciate those introductory thoughts. I'm Jason Laumb, Director of Advanced Energy Systems Initiatives here at the EERC. And those of you that know me know I like to start my presentations out with a dad joke, and I was told I can't do that today. I was told I need to keep my dad jokes in the barn with the rest of the corn, so that's where they're going to stay. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to get down to brass tacks here, get down to business at hand. And so first I want to talk about our methodology that we use for defining, what are our opportunities, what are our needs, and how could we see business moving forward within the Williston Basin business boundary that John had shown earlier, and I'm going to show you again here shortly. Well, we took a look at, our existing infrastructure. What do we have in the way of roads, bridges, mines, other materials that we have within the Williston Basin? What businesses and industries do we have within this region that are capable of developing those resources and what businesses use those resources, what businesses might even have some of those resources. We then took a very high level look at the markets, and I'll talk about this in a lot more detail, because the market and penetrating this market is something that's going to be very, very critical. And David Flynn is going to go through some of the reasons why this market can be a bit challenging, but there's also produces some opportunities. With every challenge, there is an opportunity. And then we'll leave with, what are those gaps that we have, those gaps that we can fill here within the Williston Basin with new industry and new development. As John had mentioned earlier, when we look at the Williston Basin core CN business boundary, it's more than just North Dakota, Montana, and South Dakota, more than just what the Williston Basin itself covers. We have our friends over in Minnesota that utilize a lot of critical materials and critical minerals. And I'm going to try to distinguish as I'm talking through what I mean about each different resource. I'll try to do my best about when I'm talking about rare earths and when I'm talking about something like a critical mineral like graphite. Graphite is one example that I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about today. So as I had mentioned, our strategy, take a look at our strengths, which is going to tell you where we're strong, but at the same time, it also tells you what you don't have that provides those opportunities, those gaps that you can fill. So we took a look at things like transportation infrastructure, markets. What is our competitive environment for these materials in the basin? We found, well, there's no one really peddling these materials right now, so there's a lot of opportunity to fill that void. There's no one concentrating critical minerals like rare earths or rare earth oxides really much in the US at all. And if they do get concentrated, they have to go overseas. So there's a lot of room there for development. Wood products in North Dakota that are made, could they be superior to other products in the form of, like a lower CO2 footprint? We have several large coal-fired generating stations right now that are looking at low CO2, low carbon power that's being produced. If that can be coupled in some way, shape, or form with some of the critical materials, then the carbon intensity of those would be lowered, which would have a distinct market advantage. The last thing that we looked at is just simply having things available. Those of us that went through 2020 know that if you wanted a new Ford F-150 pickup, they were very difficult to get because there was a specific microchip that you couldn't get. Now, would we, as a country, be willing to pay $200 more for a pickup to get it sooner? I would say yes, we probably are. So it's not just pricing factors, but also availability. Excuse me. As I'd mentioned, we took a look at our advantageous transportation infrastructure within our basin. We move a lot of products within the Williston Basin and the upper Midwest in general. Excuse me for just a second here. 2 rounds with COVID will do that to a person. Our advantageous transportation infrastructure here, we move a lot of ag products. We move a lot of oil and gas products. So we have a lot of good highways. We have a lot of good rail, truck. We're not that far away from the ocean, even though we're landlocked when you consider having port access in Duluth. So our transportation infrastructure is a big key. This is going to be fussy with me now because I had to click on something else. Our products, what can we produce? Also something that's very, very important. Are we going to be looking at raw rare earths as our critical material or critical mineral? Yes, that's absolutely possible that we could be looking at raw rare earths that get concentrated someplace else. Are we going to be looking at final products, maybe magnets or aggregate, computer components, maybe making something like graphite and graphene that can support the battery industry? And I'm here to tell you that all of those are on the table. None of those markets are off the table right now. However, there are going to be different development timelines and pathways on those. Creating a rare earth element concentrate right now is going to be a bit challenging because there's so many pieces of that development process that are missing. And I'll talk a little bit about that after David has a chance to talk about pricing. So when you think about some of these products that we could produce, let's just start with something very simple like our lignite coal that could potentially go through an extraction process to create a treated coal that you could burn for electricity, at the same time extracting critical minerals like rare earths that could be used in all sorts of different products. Now, where that begins and where that ends remains to be seen. At the same time, you can take some of that carbon-rich material that you didn't burn, and you can make graphite and graphene. And those markets continue to develop. And I have a slide later on here showing what the opportunity is in these battery markets. So what do we need? What do we need within the Williston Basin here to be successful in this area? Well, some additional infrastructure and resources. Not everything is developed here. Ideas to spur that economic growth. Who wants to be the person to go out there and start extracting things like rare earth salts? And I'll talk here next about the business model for that. And then there's going to be all kinds of logistical needs to fill those supply chain gaps. Like I had mentioned before, we don't have a lot of these, even within the US. If you take that business boundary and extend it, let's just go out to the US borders. There's really only one mine right now in the US. There's several folks that are looking at recycling things, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So I'd mentioned extracting rare earth salts. How do we view this happening? We view this process as a hub and spoke type of model. Think about airlines. Think about airports, how you have the very remote locations. Let's pick on Grand Forks because that's where I'm sitting right now, and the less remote locations that are hubs. So we look at facilities being stationed directly at our mines and directly at the resource. Maybe it's a produced water, maybe it's a lignite, extracting those rare earth elements, making an oxide, and then sending those rare earth oxides to a facility located maybe a few miles away, maybe a few hundred miles away, wherever that hub is, to create the rare earth salt concentrate. Now, where the rare earth salt concentrate goes from there, could go to someplace else that can make that into the metallic form, can be used to make magnets, or could even go into microchips. Now, the other side of the market that I wanted to talk a little bit about is the battery market. This is a slide that Nolan Thaker showed during his talk about how we see growth within these markets as we look at a CO2 footprint. So the base cases here denoted by the purple circles are, the dark purple is a model based on existing policy and announcements with, battery type of materials. And the lighter circles are base case with the goals to meet the Paris Agreement. Now, what is interesting to note is you look at things like graphite. We're looking at a potential 20-fold increase in graphite needs for battery components based on 2020 needs. That is a very, very large jump in graphite. Look over at lithium. You're looking at 40 plus or 40 times as much lithium that's going to be needed to fill these markets that are going to be needed to support climate goals and even computer and other electrification needs. So how can we help within our business boundary? I view graphite production from lignite as a very near-term opportunity. How near-term? Maybe 5 to 10 years. We have had some success here at the University of North Dakota creating graphite directly from lignite coal. And here's an image that I'm showing right now that shows those graphite particles that Alex Zazenking, one of our researchers, has produced. Synthetic graphite could have a plus up of $22,000 per ton for that graphite. Now it takes 3 tons of lignite coal at the cost of $20 per ton or $60 for those 3 tons to make something that's worth $22,000. Now that is a lot of room. That's a lot of room to grow. And of course, it's an energy intensive process. And we're working on how much that's going to cost, what the inputs are, what the selling price of our synthetic graphite could be. But expected new markets that I showed earlier, we're looking at a facility that could be over 1 million tons per year in North Dakota that takes 3 million tons per year of lignite. That is a very substantial amount of coal to be mining. The other industry that I noted is recycling. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. The Department of Energy does not want us to look at recycling a lot, but it is something that I could see coming in our business boundary, because I have talked to people that are looking at doing this. Now, how would recycling take place? We have some very large magnets in our wind turbine motors that are here in North Dakota, some of them weighing several tons, that right now are essentially being tossed in landfills that do have some value. When folks would like to recycle them and get these very valuable magnet metals out of them. Other things within our area that would have value, MRI machines, hard drives, any other magnet elements in motors. So I view recycling as another near-term opportunity, another market that could be filled and could happen within the Williston Basin, that meaning North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, maybe even over into our neighbors in Minnesota. But North Dakota could certainly play a role. Now, what is the barrier? Why isn't this happening tomorrow? And David's going to talk a little bit about this. Limited market penetration and price control. If you create a product that costs X and China can sell it for X minus 1 or half X, you're going to have a very hard time selling this product on the global market. So what we need to overcome that market barrier is a large purchase agreement with an entity that says, I'm going to buy your product and I'm going to buy it for this price over this number of years to help overcome that barrier that is there with price control that China has right now. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Flynn. David, if you want to do a quick introduction of yourself here, and I will run your slides for you, sir. And he's going to talk about some of these challenges.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm David Flynn. I'm the research director for the Institute for Policy and Business Analytics in the Nistler College of Business and Public Administration here at the University of North Dakota. And it's been a real pleasure working on this project as we've been going along. So one of the things that you've heard twice now is that clearly there are opportunities along the value chain, along the supply chain. One of the things when you look at a lot of the research in this area, you find out that it's very clear that the cost structure in those firms along the supply chain, the nature of demand do not favor an enormous, overwhelming amount of concentration like we currently see. That is, there should be opportunities for entry, but it does depend, among other things, upon transportation infrastructures, energy infrastructures, water, labor availability, and as Jason mentioned in one of his previous slides, purchase agreements. The profitability is going to be a big driver for entry into these kinds of industries, as it always is. And so what we see is that those production numbers and reserve numbers, as you see here, there's the production of rare earths. China is responsible in 2020 for an overwhelming percentage of the production of these rare earth elements, with some of the other smaller players, unfortunately, including the United States, in there as well at the margin. But the research suggests that other entrants, meaning US, Australia, or even firms not on the, or countries not on this list, should be able to get in, should be able to steal market share away from China and others. It's just difficult because of that dominant position they're already in. When you look at the reserves, that is an equivalent to a proven reserve type of measure from the US Geological Survey. You can see, again, China has a dominant position, not nearly as much But I would submit when you see the US is a lower lower percentage on here than Australia, than India, than Russia, very few of the countries on this list would be viewed as a much more favorable trade partner than China. We don't have a lot of allies on this list that we look at as long-run strategic partners at this point in time. And so that's one difficulty that we encounter with the current landscape and that firms are encountering in the current landscape. I will say too, that this is not much unlike what you saw around the turn of the century: railroads, steel industry, oil industry, the industrial revolution over the 20 to 30 year time frame. We could be sitting, from everything that Jason tells me and everything I read, you could be sitting on the cusp of another industrial revolution and see that kind of takeoff growth like the US and the world encountered at that time, in large part because the demand for these products is there. That we want the various different items that these rare earths or critical minerals are used in, and therefore we're willing to pay and we're willing to go through that production. As an example, these are cellular subscriptions per 100 people in the United States alone. Okay, and the amazing thing, of course, is that there are more than 100 cell phone subscriptions for 100 people since about 2014 or so. Everybody knows somebody probably who has a business cell phone and a home personal cell phone, and that explains obviously sort of where that number comes from. But you can see that that there's just a tremendous takeoff, and right now a plateauing that's going on. Plateauing in some cases because of some supply concerns, price concerns as a result, but also in many ways because people are waiting for that next great big item. What's the next wave that's going to come in? Much like the iPhone Plus changed whether or not people wanted an iPad, and they sort of went between their iPhone and the iPad and said, I now have a large phone, and then there's the push to smaller and battery charge and all these different things. That innovation is an important driver of what's going to go on in this market. But again, as Jason mentioned, if you want the remote sensor, in your car keys, you need a particular kind of chip. If you want the remote starters, the batteries, all these different things require all these different rare earth minerals. So the price factors are something that we looked at and found were really important. And it's really important in any extractive industry. The price levels is going to determine whether firms decide to enter, whether they decide to exit, and of course are a key driver of their overall profitability. Whether we're talking oil, whether we're talking coal, if we're talking some other product. But then in addition, when you're talking about something that might be co-produced, the price factors are still a very important part of this. One thing that they're also an important part of is the risk mitigation, and that is the volatility of those prices will be very important for firms to figure out if they can be in an industry and in their long run. And so they want to know, I don't just care that we got above my break-even price level. I care how long we're going to be above and how volatile those prices are going to be bouncing around that level. All right. And so what we see right now as a problem, and that's Jason, Dean, I, others who've been on this, is that there really are no singular clear price series for rare earths. In part, this is because the science changes, the innovation changes as a result. In a particular time frame, this rare earth is the right one. In a particular time frame, this critical mineral is the hot one. And so that volatility of just design and innovation becomes problematic. We threw in a mining producer price index as something that might be comparable in order to see how this looked. And so you can see a listing of many of the rare earths here. You can observe that there's some variability. They don't all move exactly the same, but there's a consistency to that rare earth. And there actually is some consistency with the mining producer price index, except for a time period where there was an enormous inflation in the rare earths prices. And this in particular was due to the closure of a mine in China that drove rare earth prices, as you can see, in many cases, literally through the roof, and had a significant impact on the thought process of many countries around access to these minerals. Action is not necessarily following, but we'll take a look. In particular, I'm going to highlight a few here. I'm not going to pretend that I can actually pronounce all of these correctly. The periodic table, I think the last period when I looked at the periodic table was probably 6th period chemistry when I was in junior year of high school, and so that is beyond my skill set. But one of the things that we've seen throughout the last, and I'm going to roughly call it 25 years of this industry, this extractive industry for rare earths and critical minerals, when you look at the data, at some times you do get demand fluctuations driving price. At some times you do get supply fluctuations driving price. What's very clear overarching this all, though, is that innovation is an enormous factor, and the new products, the significant improvement of existing products are really important drivers, both on the supply side and the demand side for rare earths and those end products that are out there. And in looking at these specific ones that we're highlighting, you can see that these again were very much moving in tandem. They did move roughly with the mining producer price index. You do see again, some very high price increases, some very significant changes going along with this, and so that's an important part of what's going on. That volatility is a hugely important part of understanding why firms may be reluctant to enter without some of the things like Jason mentioned, a large purchase agreement, guaranteeing price increases, guaranteeing that large producers of these rare earths cannot come in, undercut them, and cause a cratering of the market. A similar to the old style thinking of, say, an OPEC cartel type of model, where they'll undercut and try to run out competitors in the market. What's unknown is, from our perspective right now, is that innovation is really difficult to predict. When do these breakthroughs happen? How do they happen? Are they scalable? Can they become industrialized? Can they become diffused throughout the industry? But equally important is going to be that economic consequence of innovation. And it's just that much more difficult to determine. These innovations, if they're not scalable, then it might not be important. It's important from a scientific perspective, but it's not important from a business model perspective if we can't put it to scale, implement it in production facilities. The other thing is that broader circumstances matter right now. Policy matters, interest rate matters, and really do influence benefit cost calculations at firms that are thinking of entry. As an example here, you can think of interest rates right now rising. The cost of capital is going up significantly for firms as they try to think whether or not they can get both the physical capital and the financial capital in order to make these things go. You also have the U.S. government. Are they going to engage in this in something that amounts to tangible policy outcomes versus rhetoric at this point? We've already had presidential letters suggesting that the national security of the United States is tied to these and is important, and therefore we should be doing something. But that something hasn't followed through. Is it a governmental purchase? Is it a governmental guarantee? We haven't seen exactly what form that would take yet, and that means that national security and economic security, two very important things to most people in the United States, are really left in a situation of significant uncertainty at this point in time, and that means that firms are probably sitting on the sidelines waiting for some resolution of those questions as they go forward. In looking at the circumstances and situations, you can see the transportation map reproduced here again. There are significant advantages to the Williston Basin that we think present what we call a natural risk mitigation. There's transportation access, whether rail, truck or the Port of Duluth, and so water access. You've got labor issues potentially, but the good news right now is that everybody has labor issues right now. And so that's, while it may be a detriment to one area, it's actually a detriment to all. Water availability, energy, these kinds of things really do sit there. And as John Kay mentioned at the beginning, you talk about expertise in the area already, and that's another hugely important factor. And so you add all these together, and they can provide a protection of both physical and financial capital investment at this point in time. So thanks very much, and I'll turn it back over to Jason.
All righty, thank you, David. Here is David's contact information. He said you can call him anytime, day or night. He just may not answer. So I do have a few more slides to kind of wrap us up here, and then we can get to some questions if anybody has questions here. So I'm going to talk about key findings and key takeaways. So I mentioned that I was going to talk about this whole supply chain that we may have or may not have here within the Williston Basin. Well, I'm here to tell you that we really don't have much of any of this within the United States. There is one mine, there's a Mountain Pass mine, rare earth element mine in California. This particular mine produces a lot of the light and less valuable rare earth elements, not so much of the magnet elements that we had talked about and that David had highlighted earlier in his pricing information. We have a lot of folks that want finished goods. Okay, we have some new microchip factories that have been announced in places like Ohio by some heavy hitters within the industry, like I believe one of them was Samsung. So we have some of these things coming online, but we have this big gap right here. We have this big gap that can be filled. Some folks see that as a detriment. I see it as an opportunity that we can fill here within our region and start building some of these businesses. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. David talked about some of the challenges, but we also have some technology challenges here as well. Not only has China held a lot of the material in the past, but they've held some of the technology for concentrating and metallizing and using these critical elements and critical minerals and materials. Is one of the reasons why we are looking at here at the University of North Dakota ways to extract not only the rare earth elements, but ways to produce some of the carbon-based products directly from what we have in our region. And I'm really excited about developing those technologies that can fill that gap that we've seen. So the key takeaways: number one, critical mineral users and markets are globally influenced. I think David's presentation, showed some of the price volatility and how much of this market that folks outside the U.S. do control. However, if you did look at the U.S.'s reserves, that David provided, there are not insignificant. We certainly have enough to make some noise in this market if we do indeed decide to go after it. For the rare earth elements, I think it's going to be a hub and spoke development where you have folks extracting rare earths from many different sources, not just lignite coal, but produced waters. And there are even some ores that do have rare earths within the United States and sent to more centralized facilities for them to be developed into either salts or even metals, and then elsewhere to be made into the widget. The key market barrier is the buyer. Who is going to be willing to step forward? Is it going to be the U.S. military that says the 800 and some pounds of rare earths that go into our F-35 fighter jets can no longer come from China? We have to domestically source them. Is it going to be some major chip manufacturer within the United States that says, hey, we're only going to take materials for our chips that are domestically sourced within the U.S.? That is what I feel it's going to take. David and Dean, I'm putting words in your mouth right now, but I think they would agree with me that it's going to take that buyer to step up, develop those gaps and those technologies, and be able to start providing some of these materials. So with that, John, I don't know, do you want me to pause here and take questions before you do your final slides, or how would you like me to go?
Let me go ahead and wrap up here, and then we'll be open to the questions that we have till the end. So
sounds good.
just shoot me to the next slide there. So just real quickly, the Department of Energy, of course, has recognized some of the issues that have been brought up today. And then also understanding that nationally, there's not a good reference point for where does the US actually have a good supply of critical minerals and rare earth elements. And so they developed this CORE-CM program to try and address some of this, understanding that they need to capitalize on economic growth and job creation, and how do we go about strengthening national security in our economy. And so we're number 6 on this list, the Williston Basin. There are 13 of these programs throughout the US. And so if you go to the next slide, this is our project team for the Williston Basin CORE-CM program. These are folks that we're working with directly on a day-to-day basis, all the way to interaction and advice and sharing of information. And you can see that there are several other CORE-CM teams that we keep in contact with as we're moving forward with our own. But you can see through this whole list that it's a large, well-diverse group of folks, not only within the basin, but this extends well across the United States. One more time, I'd like to thank the funding sponsors that are involved in this program. The larger one being the U.S. Department of Energy through the National Energy Technology Laboratory, and the North Dakota Industrial Commission through the Lignite Research Development and Marketing Program. Again, the Energy Producers Basin Electric Power Cooperative, Minn-Kota Power Cooperative, 2 mine companies within North Dakota, BNI Energy, got it right, and North American Coal Corporation, and Current Chemical, specifically Current Lighting, that's been providing advice and help throughout the project. So real quickly, we'll throw up these acknowledgements of and disclaimers. And so these are just to say that everything that we're doing here, these are our words and our opinions, and they're not the Department of Energy's, nor are they the North Dakota Industrial Commission's. And if we happen to talk about something that is a trade name, we're not endorsing that product. Finally, this has been recorded, like I mentioned at the beginning, and will be put online on our website. And you can see the website address down below. And as I had also said at the beginning, here once again is the QR code that will get you to that website. If you forget about this and want to come back later and say, hey, I can't remember how to get here, look up our emails that we've been sending out. Contact one of us, and we'll be happy to steer you in the right direction. Now with that, I'd like to open the floor to everyone for any questions. I don't think there had been any put in the chat yet, but if something comes to mind right now, please feel free to unmute yourself and throw that question out there. Or if you're not feeling like you want to speak up vocally, please, you can throw something in the chat right now.
Hey, John, this is Mike. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
All right. I get a little confused on the need we have for the intermediate processing. For example, we say we're import reliant, but then we have the Mountain Pass. In fact, that was shown, that input was shown on one of David's slides. But then from my understanding, we ship the Mountain Pass mining product to China, who owns maybe 10, 15% of that mine. and they process it. So I guess my question's kind of convoluted, but I'm wondering, as part of our US rare earth element and critical mineral effort, do we need to also expand not only on the resource side, but on the intermediate processing? And
Yes, absolutely.
And
Oh,
do
I'm
I
sorry.
understand Mountain Pass correctly?
Yeah, I think you've nailed one of the large kinks in the whole issue, and Nolan Thaker in the last presentation, Mike, was addressing some of this, and we do need to look at this whole chain, because again, even if we just take a single bit of this, whether we just look at the mining portion or even just the extraction portion, we do not have the other elements in that chain that are up and running at large scale in the US. And so we have to take them out outside of the United States to do any further processing with them. For that though, with my knowledge base, I'm gonna pass this off to Jason and let him add to that. And maybe even Nolan, if he's still on, might wanna offer a comment as well.
So Mike, to add on to what John said, it's not only the physical plants that we don't have, there's also some technology gaps there that we're missing. And so that's one of the reasons why it's going to be even longer before we get to having the entire, value chain, processing chain, whatever you want to call it, for rare earth elements in the US. And Mountain Pass and anyone else that, even some of these folks looking at recycling these large magnets that I had mentioned right now, they'll get the magnets out and they'll bust them up in small pieces. Those small pieces also get sent overseas, someplace else where, the rare earth magnets are actually made. So there's a lot of room for growth here.
Can I just jump in for 1 second here as well?
You bet.
This is a bigger economic problem too, in the sense that what we're sending over is again, I'm going to say it wrong, but we're sending over a lower value raw product, and we're getting back a higher value concentrated product when then we go and buy from whatever the Chinese intermediate steps are. That inherently is economically disadvantageous, from a trade balance perspective, as well as other things. And so that is a further part of the economic problem around this issue. Is the low value goes away, we get money for the low value item, but then the high value stuff comes back and we're sending receipts overseas for that. And so this is another part of that problem.
Nolan, don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any comment you'd like to throw out as well?
I mean, Jason and David did a really good comment. Hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yep.
Okay. Jason and David did a really good comment on it, but I mean, I'd just echo that, like, some of these processing steps as of right now that exist in the, not just in the US, but in the non-China controlled world, there's a handful or less of companies that do this on the planet. And so it's, if you want to refine rare earths, basically no one in the United States does it, but there's a couple of people that might do it in Australia or Malaysia. If I want to make metals, there's a company in the United Kingdom that does it, but it may not be in Australia and Malaysia, so I have to ship it back around the world again for that to avoid this. And so it just, to echo the processing problem, the entire process is what's needed. It's not just one step, it's all the steps. But it is kind of a chicken and egg scenario where, do I build the processing train without the concentrate, in which case, where do I get that material? Or do I build the concentrate without the processing train and then build that out later?
Thank you all.
Any other questions? None. Any questions about any aspects of critical minerals and rare earths, even if it's not business related? If you've got something on your mind, please ask.
All
right,
right, I
well,
have
sir.
one more then. I'm
Okay,
not
go.
gonna let you off that easy. So I like the graphite topic as well. Jason, I think you had the slide up. And I was wondering, as you guys work on your graphite, you showed the one target, the $22,000 target. Are there other qualities of graphite and graphene that you can target with a little less processing that can give you a bigger market?
Yeah, that's a very good point, Mike. And the short answer is yes, there is. And so as we've been talking about different grades of these carbon products that you can make, I've been telling our team, think about an industrial diamond. Now, it's not something flashing, shiny that you're going to put on your significant other's finger, but it makes a really good material to cut things with. Okay, so I'm telling folks, think about not just the highest grade and highest purity of material to make, maybe make a graphene that doesn't have the 99.9% purity, but it's still going to be electrically conductive and still going to have all of that strength and all those other very good properties that you want out of something like a graphene. I mean, and you know, on the graphite side, I mean, who cares if you break a hockey stick every once in a while, right? It's supposed to happen. So in short, yes, there's many other grades that can be made. And that's one of the things that we're looking at is what can we make? How many different grades can we make? What does it cost? And where can we get that into the market?
Great, thanks.
Maybe got time for one more quick question if somebody has one.
I had a quick question. Levi Mox is here with the Geological Survey. Last I had checked, it was about a year ago. Mountain Pass was still mostly just producing, or I should say, getting back neodymium and praseodymium, so really just two of the rare earth elements, and they were looking into maybe expanding sort of their processing so that they could get a few more. And that's sort of one of the advantages of perhaps North Dakota lignite, is that we would get some of the heavy rare earths that are, you know, produced nowhere in the US. And then around that time as well, I think Round Top Mine in Texas was talking about producing some of the heavies. And I was wondering if there's been any progress from those two mines, which I guess would be the only US sources for some of the heavy rare earth elements, if anyone's heard about that.
Yeah, Jason, do you want to jump in there? Do you have more updated info?
I really don't. Nolan, I know you've looked at this as well. Do you have any updated information? As far as I know, that's still what's going on.
The Mountain Pass resource, forgive my ignorance if there are any Mountain Pass people on the line, but from what I've read from reports as well as just general reserves, they just really don't have the heavy rare earths in that reserve. They just aren't there. So I mean, they're looking at trying to separate it, but frankly, they're to build a plant that actually makes sense, they're going to have to bring in other resources elsewhere, just because they don't have enough of the heavy rare earths to even like make sense to build their own plant. Round Top, I know, has some more heavy rare earths, but they're also not producing yet, to my knowledge, unless that's changed in the last few months. And there's always questions and concern whenever you're permitting a new mine, whether you're going to hit some lethal roadblock. I think they're through a lot of it, and I think they're moving, but that is a concern that at least our especially if we're looking at some of our active lignite mines, we wouldn't hit those roadblocks because they're already permitted mines. You wouldn't have to re-permit them.
Right. Yeah, I know with Round Top, some of that hard rock ore, I mean, they had concentrations of those heavy elements that would be equivalent to an enriched North Dakota lignite, but of course, it's still a hard rock ore. So I assume processing is going to be pretty expensive, and so that was part of their business model about you know what some of their profits were going to be, but whether they can actually get them in a cost-effective way will be interesting to kind of keep an eye on going forward. But thank you.
Yeah, all right, so we've kind of hit the end of our 1 hour allotment for everyone. So I think we'll wrap this up. Again, thank you to everyone for attending today.